All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks jump on here momentarily as well. But just hello and welcome. My name is Jordan Sherby-Lencioni, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at Monmouth College. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Tartan Talk titled Health Science and Human Movement. We're thrilled to be here tonight with our alums and friends from around the country, and we're very grateful to have Dr. Laura Moore and Professor Jen Braun join us this evening for a presentation on Monmouth College's newest major, which they helped create. Dr. Laura Moore will celebrate her 15th year of service to Monmouth College, along with receiving the Hatch Award for Distinguished Teaching. Each year, Dr. Moore supervises student participants in the Keith Summer Research Program, set up by the gift from the illustrious Richard Doc Keith. This hand-on scholarship for students has launched them into a variety of successful fields and maintained the chemistry program as one of our many prides of Monmouth College. In addition to effective research and teaching, Dr. Moore has directed the pre-med program since her hire, co-coordinated the Sophia Summer Research Program for 11 years, advises pre-health majors, and is the co-coordinator of the college's new neuroscience major, as well as serving on numerous standing committees. Professor Jen Braun has taught in the Monmouth College Department of Kinesiology for 9 years, teaching courses in health and human physiology. Jen advises exercise science majors and pre-health majors and is the co-coordinator of the new health science and human movement major with Dr. Moore. Jen is currently working on coaching stress with a colleague, which is fitting as she's also married to the Fighting Scots head football coach, Chad Braun. Before we get started today, I have a few housekeeping items for the group. For the best of viewing experience, we recommend selecting speaker view up in the right corner of your screen. And I also encourage you to interact with other attendees using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Make sure you're responding to all panelists and all attendees, that way everybody can see what you're saying. After the presentation today, attendees will have the option to turn on your cameras to ask questions, or you can still use that chat function, whichever you prefer. And then at the very end of our event tonight, you'll receive a 2-minute survey that'll pop up in your web browser. Just let us know your thoughts on tonight's program, as well as give us some suggestions for future events. Laura and Jen, the floor is now yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess I have control of the slides, so we're going to see how this works. Jen and I have created this major. It was approved in October, and we're really excited about it. We have a number of students who are already, well, it hasn't officially been put in the curriculum yet, so the registrar is still working on creating that, but there are at least 8 students who are going to be signed up for it, and that was when I talked to the registrar in November. So we know that this is something of interest for these students. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it came about, and then Jen's going to talk about some of what we see as some of the unique aspects of this major, especially with why it's called health science and human movement. I'm the science part, and Jen's the human movement part. So we will try to explain that. So we have had a lot of students who go on to what we call professional schools, right? So I have been advising, as it was said in the introduction, the students going to these professional schools since I came here: med school, dental school, pharmacy school, physician's assistant school. And I think what we saw when I came in, we have pretty good science programs that are very compatible with the prerequisites for those programs. So typically students in biochemistry, biology, and our new neuroscience major fit those types of professional schools. What this new major in health sciences and human movement really focuses on are the professional schools that do focus on human movement, although there are some other professions that we see that could fit the curriculum. So those are physical therapy, occupational therapy are 2 of them, and we've had a lot of students go to those recently, but we think our new major will fit that. Also chiropractic medicine. We've had quite a few students go to chiropractor school in different places. Some come back here and work in town in Monmouth itself. And some of the new things like athletic training, athletic training, as I'll explain in a couple slides, used to be a bachelor's degree, but that's no longer true. And so we have the opportunity to prepare students for athletic training master's programs now. So, so one of the reasons this came about is that Jen and I realized that when we were advising students in health careers, that there was this kind of gap, especially for these movement professions. So that's where this major came from, and that's why we created it. Okay. So another thing why it fits really nicely right now, why we're doing this, is that over the years, there's been an inflation in health career degrees. That is, the terminal degree is now something different than it used to be. And these students often now need certain prerequisites as undergraduates to be able to go to the professional school. So physical therapy used to be a bachelor's degree, and it went through a master's. Some were master's programs. And then since 2016, they've only been doctoral programs. So that's the DPT program, which have specific prerequisites. Occupational therapy was originally a bachelor's degree, and it's currently a master's degree in many programs, but that profession is also changing, and I think they're moving to doctoral programs in some of their association stuff, that they say that that's going to be by 2027. They expect all the programs to be doctoral programs, and that causes a change in prerequisites for these programs often. And then two other things that have recently undergone inflation in the terminal degree is that athletic training. To sit for the board exam in this, you now need a master's degree from an accredited athletic training program. And also one that's coming up is dietetics. So if you want to become a dietitian, you also have to have a master's degree to sit for the board exam. So we have an opportunity here at Monmouth to provide an undergraduate education for these students who then go on to the professional programs that they're well trained and they can complete this easily. Since we thought we were talking to alums, so they might be interested in what is the curriculum, because maybe you see something that you're like, wow, I didn't know we had that. So this actually is a Bachelor of Science degree. The Bachelor of Science was put in a few years ago when we put in the engineering program, because it made sense to put in a Bachelor of Science. There's a few other disciplines that have bachelors of science. Chemistry and biochemistry have a Bachelor of Science track. Neuroscience is a Bachelor of Science, and I think accounting has a Bachelor's of Science. And typically what that is there's more than the 32 classes for the Bachelor's of Arts that they have to take. So, and there's more classes in the major typically. That's how it's been defined at Monmouth. So the way when we sat down to think about this last year, we were thinking, okay, what do they need to be prepared for the professional schools? And what will make our program stand out? So we have a few core courses that most of them are in the kind of lower level science courses and in a lower level exercise science that gets them prepared for other things. The one special thing in this grouping of courses is Exercise Science 310, which is human movement and health. And that's actually taught by the department chair in kinesiology, Sean Shum. He has a class strictly on human movement. Jen, do you want to say anything about what he teaches in there? You're probably better to talk about that than I am.
Yeah, when I'm going to kind of talk about that when I get to just kind of the concepts that we brought into the curriculum. So yeah, definitely. I'll talk about that in a little bit here.
Yeah. So that's the core courses were things that we thought that it's just the basic science and the basic kinesiology type principles. Then another thing that is very important and actually is very exciting for most of the students coming into this is they get to take a lot of anatomy and physiology. And in talking to prospective students who are interested in these areas, that's what they love. They love this in high school. So it is an attractive major when you say, oh, there's a lot of anatomy and physiology you can take. It also helps that we have a cadaver lab. So we have a cadaver that the students can work on, and they get really excited about that. And in these anatomy and physiology classes, they get experience with that. So they take at least two more of these A&P classes. Sometimes they'll count these as an upper level science class too, or an application class. Students also have to take quantitative reasoning. I realize I left something out of here. We also, the data science class, which we have, also counts as that. It depends. If they go into data analysis, it might be good to do data science. Then we have an area where they have to pick a class, a total of a class. Some of these are half credit classes where they do an application area. So that is really something applied in movement or something applied in health science. And so those are some of the things. I know a lot of students are excited about taking the athletic training course that we have. Another special thing about this major is that we have what we call the breadth requirement. So that's where they go away from exercise science and the sciences and take some more social science. They only have to take one course in this area. And certainly some of the professions might require more psychology and stuff like that, but we wanted them to take at least one course really outside perhaps some of their comfort areas. So that is what counts there. And then since this is science, we put a list down of what we're calling advanced science classes. Some of them are not upper level classes, but they have a long list that they can choose from. And then finally, they have a capstone experience that they need to complete. This kind of makes them much more like some of the science majors that we have. They're going to have to take science seminar, biology, chemistry, biochem, physics, engineering, all take science seminar, and this major does too. And then they also have to complete some sort of experiential final experience where they either do an internship, which certainly for professional schools, that's highly encouraged, or they can do research as an independent study in exercise science or in one of the other sciences. So we all have research courses in there. And that's one of the exciting things about this major. A lot of times students come in and they find out perhaps they don't want to go to professional school after all. We want them to have something else in this major so that, they can go on to graduate school. And certainly we have some students who are in graduate school in exercise physiology type things that this major would be good for. And those students would be it'd be really good if they could have a research experience. We also have a few recommended courses. We didn't put these in as requirements because they aren't full credit courses, so it makes it hard to count. But medical terminology is something that these health professions often want. And also I teach a course in Introduction to Health Careers that is really interesting. I'm actually just started teaching it this semester, or just started the second iteration of it this semester. I've done it once before, right before COVID, and it got done because it's a half semester class, so that was good. But this is a really great class. So all students in all different health careers take this. My class this year is highly PT oriented. I found out when I had class on Monday. And what we do is we bring in speakers in the health careers. So one of our alums is coming in 2 weeks to talk about chiropractic medicine. We also talk about how to write personal statements, and then we talk about some of the things in the profession that is really important now, such as what's called professionalism and ethics. And so that's one of the things that I try to have discussions about that. It's a once a week class. It meets for 2 hours in the evening, so I can bring in the speakers in the evening after they get off work. But this is a really important part. I use this book, Personal and Professional Growth for Healthcare Professions. This is the picture here is from 2 years ago. It was the final session of this class. One of the regional, it's a regional health support network came in, and to show the students what they're doing in this activity is they're learning how to suture, which I thought was really cool. But so there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on in this health careers class that we're not making the students in this take, but certainly if they're planning to go to professional school, we encourage that. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to turn this over to Jen. Are you ready,
Yeah,
Jen?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add when we were talking about just the different careers that would be best suited for this major, Laura and I have also talked about, creating a minor. So even those pre-med and pre-PA students can also, get a minor in health science and human movement. But we've had several students that are planning on going to medical school take courses in our department. So
yeah.
So I wanted to mention that really quickly. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the human movement aspect of this, because like Laura said, it really makes it unique. And I think it's actually very important, and it's in line with current research. So that makes me pretty excited too. But you can see the one of the things I have on the slide here is this general workout and recovery cycle. And we call that the stress recovery and adaptation cycle. And we talk about that all the time in exercise science. And essentially, this line across is, homeostasis, and we want to disrupt that homeostasis by lifting heavier weight or running a little further or running a little faster, something that induces stress or is a stimulus. And then, we feel kind of crummy the day after we ran a little further or lifted a little heavier. But eventually that induces an adaptation, right? So we get stronger, we get faster, we can run further. And that's really how we see things. And we think if we don't do it, if we don't exercise, we just kind of hang out at that red line at homeostasis, right? And what we're finding out really is there is adaptation to stressors or stimuli, but there's also maladaptation to a lack of stressors or stimuli. So yes, when you work out, you're going to see some adaptations, but when you don't work out, you're also going to see some adaptations, more negative, right? So I happen to be reading, and I think Jordan is going to link some of these sources in the chat, but I happen to be reading this article that is up on the screen by Mark Hamilton. And actually I showed one of his talks in one of my classes, and the title of his talk based on this paper was called "Why Today's Exercise Recommendations Are Turning Us into Exercising Couch Potatoes." And I just thought that was really interesting. Like, what's an exercising couch potato, right? So I talked to our department chair that Laura mentioned earlier, Sean Shum, and mentioned this to him, and kind of this concept of inactivity physiology. We talk about the physiology of exercise, but what is the physiology of inactivity? What is happening in our cells when we don't move? And he happened to be reading some similar research. So Sean and I both kind of started talking, and then Laura and I started talking of what value this would have to our students, because this isn't taught in professional school. They don't have time to teach this in medical school. So we thought, let's grab some of these students in undergraduate and just give them an interest in this and develop some of these habits, and then they can pass them along. So basically, when I mentioned that exercising couch potato, one way to think about it is, what's the difference between someone who exercises for 30 or 45 minutes on the treadmill every morning and then goes and sits at a desk all day long, comes home, lays on the couch all night long, and then goes to bed, versus, I think of some of our college students maybe who are playing video games all day, right? So what's the difference metabolically between those two different types of people? And actually what research is finding is not a lot of difference, actually. So that's kind of where this exercising couch potato comes in. So essentially I was thinking of this is almost like the science of use it or lose it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And our bodies are designed to be as efficient as possible. So if we're not using something, our body is going to, it's not going to use that muscle tissue. That muscle tissue is going to go away. Okay. So that's one of the papers that kind of started this whole conversation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second too. But I also wanted to share a couple of other sources that are pretty interesting. So Daniel Lieberman's book, Exercised, he's an evolutionary biologist that teaches at Harvard. And he's even been on a couple of PBS Novas. So Dr. Shem and I have both read this book, and he has some really interesting points. This is focused a lot on like hunter-gatherer populations and how hunter-gatherers have moved. Now we're not going to be quite that extreme, but he has some really good points. And then Katie Bowman is a biomechanist, and she has this book called Move Your DNA. She has a couple of other good books, and then she has a podcast. So if you guys are interested at all, I encourage you to look up Katie Bowman. So next, I'm going to expand a little bit more on this, but I want to talk to you about how we're integrating this into the curriculum. So if you wouldn't mind, Laura, move into that next slide. Thank you. So you'll kind of see what it looks like when we integrate this into the curriculum. These are some photos taken this year from one of my classes. But so our department chair has kind of looked at how we can introduce human movement into the curriculum and some of these concepts. So as Laura mentioned earlier, he has an entire course that is focused on human movement. And then we've kind of created little modules that we plug into a 100 level course that I teach and a 200 level course that I teach. So they're going to get a little bit of it every year and in different ways. So the first thing that we want our students to understand when they take these courses that talk about human movement is mechanobiology. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with mechanobiology. It's a slightly newer field of biology that studies the effects of forces on our cells and how those forces change gene expression and how lack of force and loading cause a lack of gene expression. So basically, practically speaking, we want to teach students physiologically why it's important to load our cells in different ways. And I keep saying cells. I talked to my class about this the other day. We look at the organism as a whole and forget that the organism is comprised of organ systems and organs and tissues, right, and cells. So everything that happens genetically in these cells is expressed greater in the organism as a whole, right? So we're really trying to get students to see that these adaptations are happening at the cellular level, okay? These little things that we think of as cells are causing these great big changes, okay? So basically, mechanobiology is thinking about or studying how we load cells. A practical example of this is, if we don't load our cells in certain ways, and we think of like creating tension in cells, compressing cells, applying torque on cells, those kinds of things, like moving all of the cells in different ways. So one practical way I think about this is, as we get older, a lot of times it's harder for us to get dressed, right? Because we have our hands over our head. How often do we load our bodies with our hands over our head? Well, not very often. So, when we're younger, we hang off monkey bars, we're carrying things. But as we age, we don't do that as much. I mean, the last time I hung off monkey bars was probably in elementary school, right? So we don't do those things anymore. We're not loading our body in that way. So over time, it gets more and more difficult to pull our shirt on in the morning and pull it off at night. So one thing that we are trying to think about is, if you're not loading those cells, that's what's going to happen. How do we load those cells? What does that look like throughout the day? So I'll get to that part here in a second. And then athletically speaking, even if you think about athletically speaking, I was talking to our department chair, and we were talking about all of the injuries in the NFL right after the really big COVID shutdown, right? So there was no preseason. They were spending a lot of time in the weight room. And in the weight room, you're doing these repetitive movements, squatting, right? Up and down. And then all of a sudden, when you get on the field, you're moving laterally, right? You're having to move quickly. So you hadn't loaded and trained those cells in that way, so you're more susceptible to injury. So that's kind of a really quick explanation of mechanobiology. So the other thing that we want our students to do is develop a physical competency. Okay, so we want our students to know anatomy. We want our students to know movement and the science of movement, and we want them to be able to move their bodies correctly. The other thing that we're still developing is addressing motivation and meaning. And this is something that we're really going to work more this summer on, developing the motivation and meaning behind moving and physical activity. So how do we figure out our why? Why do we move? And how do we teach others to find their why and be meaningful in their movement? So this is, very obviously has a lot of roots in psychology and behavior change and that kind of thing. So that's something we address in our courses, okay? And then the last thing that I'm going to focus the most on is, we want our students to integrate non-exercise physical activity in their lives. And then we want them to teach their clients or patients to integrate that same non-exercise physical activity into their lives. Because like I said earlier, if we're moving for 30 to 45 minutes a day and we're sitting the rest of the time, we're still not doing what we need to do to stay active for as long as possible. And that's what we all want, right? So how we are right now teaching our students to integrate non-exercise physical activity is to think about it and be intentional about it. So Laura, would you mind moving to that next slide for me, please? Thank you. So Jordan also has the link for this. If anyone is interested, it actually is it's kind of fun and it's kind of eye-opening. So this is called an activity tracker. But normally when we think of an activity tracker, we think of like a Fitbit, right? Well, this is the paper activity tracker, more looking at movement, okay? More looking at how we're moving throughout our day. So right now, for example, in the 200 level course I'm teaching, this week, they got this activity tracker, and they're not supposed to do anything differently. They are supposed to think about the way they're moving all week long, and they're supposed to record how many hours a day they're doing certain things. So we want students to kind of look at their movement diet. We really want to think about our movements kind of like we think about the way we eat. We want it to be well-balanced, well-rounded, fruits and vegetables and protein and carbohydrates. And we want our movements to be well-rounded too. So my students this week are, and Sean uses this in his courses too. They're gonna really kind of pay attention to how they're moving. So, looking at this activity tracker, if we look at hours per week activity, well, I told them, I said, okay, let's think about sitting in class. How often, how many hours per week are you sitting in class? And then when we look across these little check boxes, right, these are really the movements that we need to think about when people are sitting in class or sitting at their desk. Their thighs are forward, right? So an example of thighs back is walking, running, those kinds of things. When you think of your leg bones being behind you, most often our thighs are forward. Well, if we're not going to use it, we're going to lose that mobility, right? How often do we have a stiff flexed spine, right? When we're sitting at our desk? Not very often are we working on our spine being dynamic, right? Turning behind us, that kind of thing. How often are we in a fixed arm position? Okay, so if we're not stimulating those cells for the majority of the week, and we wonder why we have movement deficiencies over time if we continue to maintain these positions, right? So students, we really want them to start looking at their day in a different way, because the next step is to introduce some of these things that they're deficient in. So we'll come and we'll talk about what they're deficient in. Like, for example, arm hanging. Not many people, like I said earlier, are hanging off things or hanging from the side off things, right? So grip strength is another thing. So we'll talk about that and talk about how to do that throughout the week, but then we'll do it in class. So those are some of the pictures you saw earlier, things that we're doing in class to kind of teach them, right? So I want to point out one picture, and probably some of you are like, why did you put a picture in here of people standing in class in socks? Well, they're standing on pool noodles. So sometimes I teach class in the nutrition lab. It has lab tables, so you have to stand up. So I have all of these pool noodles, and students stand on them. They can use them to stretch out their hips, different things while I'm lecturing. Because one of the deficiencies we have is, our feet get used to just being against, they're not experiencing a lot of shear forces, right? They're in shoes, they're on sidewalks, they're on very even surfaces. Well, as we get older, one thing that is more difficult is to walk on uneven ground, right? So if over time we continue to introduce uneven ground to our feet, our feet are going to communicate with our brain. That communication will be maintained, right? And hopefully down the road help us when we're walking on uneven ground and help reduce falls. So that's one thing we do. A lot of times we get up during class, we do get ups. You can see in that picture where people are all on all fours. We actually were working on getting up off the ground and trying not to use both hands, just use one hand. Most of them sometimes could use no hands. I can't do that anymore, but doing things like that and just taking little breaks. So for example, practically speaking, there probably isn't a whole lot of time in your day to do this, to do 10 get-ups off the ground, but we do this in class. We talk about the value. So something I do in my life is anytime I put on shoes, I sit on the floor. I sit on the floor and put my running shoes on. I sit on the floor to take my running shoes off. So there during the day, I have to sit on the floor and get up, 5 times a day, whatever it is, however many times I'm taking my shoes off and putting them back on. Okay. So that's kind of a way that we want them to look at their day differently. That's one of the things we do. Another thing we do that they really enjoy is, they're always carrying backpacks on their backs, right? That's where they're loading. Okay. But we want to teach them to think about loading in a different way. So someday they'll come to class. I usually open up my office and they grab textbooks off my shelf and throw them in their backpack. And we carry our backpacks like this, or we carry our backpacks like this, or we carry our backpacks like this, like the farmers carry. And just teaching them to think about that intentionally. Now, that might sound crazy, but I was telling my students this the other day, when I put away all of my, summer yard pots and benches and that kind of thing, I specifically thought about how I was loading my body when I did it. So if you would have looked in my backyard, you would have seen me carrying my bench over my head, carrying my flower pots like this, carrying a flower pot like this, right? So just thinking intentionally about movements that we already do, okay? Another example is, I've been working on this, but it's hard to be intentional about it. Every time I go through a door, I want to try to hang from the door frame. My feet don't leave the ground. It's probably a thing of the past. I won't be doing pull-ups anytime soon, but grabbing the door frame as you go through, right? That's not difficult. You go through a door frame how many times a day? So just little things like that, we're trying to teach our students so they can teach their clients to learn how to move throughout the day and hopefully, apply different loads to those tissues and have greater movement as they age. So the last thing I want to say is just kind of where we're at with this major. And, Laura mentioned the research course. So we would really like to expand that a little bit more, expand upon the research experience, with equipment, getting more equipment for students to perform research activities, get some more lab space. My very big dream is to kind of become more of a wellness campus. I would love to have a room that had like preschool tables. We already have a room that has lab tables where people can stand, have preschool tables where we have to sit and, get other departments kind of interested in this and kind of have a wellness campus, I guess. Now that is a very big dream, but hopefully our students will become passionate and try to encourage that across our campus. So that's all I have.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and open it up so that our attendees can show their faces. Turn your video on if you'd like. So just one moment while I go through the list. It looks like a couple people did drop off, but we still should be pretty good. So we'll wait just a second for folks to get that notification. And if you're not comfortable being on camera, that's totally fine. You can also ask questions in the chat. There we go. Got a couple people jumping on. Awesome. All right, so I'll just open the floor. If you've got a question, please feel free at this time to ask it, whether it's in the chat or if you want to turn your mic on, that's great as well.
John Dahl, class of 1975. Good evening to all of you.
Hi.
First, thank you for the movement at 68 years old, going actually in my 69th year. I feel those effects, so I'm very eager to deep dive into the work activity chart and some of those resources you shared. I'm a 45-minute treadmill, 2 miles, 3.1 miles. I just told my heart doctor that the other day. He was happy, but I know I can build more into my day. My question is chakras. I don't know much about chakras as being a part of maybe the energy side of physicality. But I helped with the installation of a labyrinth at Monmouth College this past summer. And I heard, I don't know, I don't have an article or anything to reference, but I heard that if you walk or run the labyrinth, you're, I think to use your terminology, you're loading cells. And in some of the kinesiology studies will show some improvement. So anyway, I just any thoughts on that and how that might work into your program?
Yeah, you know, I haven't read much about it, but it's interesting. I was watching just it was a movement, like I was trying to get different ideas to do movements in class, and it was actually so Dr. Shum and some of his class, they will actually roll and do all kinds of things, crawling, all of that kind of thing. So I was watching actually like a rolling and crawling workout, and they mentioned chakras. I just don't know much about them. Yeah, but it's interesting that you said that.
Well, somebody's research project in the future, I suspect.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of connections that we don't know about, because, you know, these things are, there's a lot of stuff in this that is not known, which is really exciting, but it also makes it very confusing too in some ways. So I
Yeah.
think, I don't know if you noticed, there's a nutrition course on the list of science courses, and I usually teach that. And, you know, when you start talking about nutrition, there's a lot of things that's just not known. So that's just something that we can come down the line with. So.
Mhm.
Hi.
Hi, Emily.
Hi. Emily, class of 2016.
Wow.
Yeah, 16. That's when it was. As you're going through this major and, you know, the development and the creation of it, my class in particular had a lot of coaches or people who wanted to be coaches. Do you see this as like as beneficial for your coaches and how you prepare them? Because I'm in coaching now, so in my field you have to have a master's as well, a master's plus experience. So, you know, how are you also preparing that group with these things, because they have to focus. We look at a lot of mechanical biology, we look at heart rate monitors, we look at force plates, we look at all these, we look at everything, the holistic student athlete. So just wanted to get your thoughts on how you're also going to prepare coaches in this field.
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the things that I like about how this new major was designed is, you know, that human movement course that Dr. Shum teaches, and those courses that I mentioned that we integrate all of this human movement, those human movement aspects. Those are exercise science courses. So every physical education major will take those. And, you know, just a straight exercise science major will take those. So the Dr. Shum's course is an elective, but most exercise science students take it. So that's kind of the advantage, is they can take those courses even as electives. Like, we know we have some students taking, I have a psychology major right now, and one of my courses, my 200 level course, we talk about this, actually a couple of psychology majors. So they can even be electives for other departments and other majors.
One of the other things that, so, you know, coaches sometimes are tasked to do other things, especially if they're hired by high schools. Carrie Shimon has developed a health education major because she knows that a lot of times it makes people more attractive to high schools for hiring for coaches, because then they can teach health also. And so that actually came along kind of at the same time that this major did. So that's one of the things that has also recently happened. So, and I don't know, do you know, has she had many people declare that yet?
I have a student right now who's a health education major in class.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So, and, you know, I think some of the other things that weren't on our list, like, you know, there are master's programs for strength and conditioning, right? And certainly that would be, you know, coaches might go through those sorts of programs. And a lot of times they do have prereqs, like you have to take Gen Chem and Gen Bio and the A&P, right? So that sets it up for those programs also.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I will go ahead and link all of those materials that Jen provided for us in our confirmation or our thank you email that will go out tomorrow. So keep a lookout for that if you didn't get them in the chat. Thank you so much, Jen and Laura, for your presentation today, and thank you all for joining us. Everyone, have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.